you imagine trying to get through the summer without a fridge to keep your food cool? Yet it wasn't too long ago, less than 100 years, that our ancestors did just that. For many, food poisoning was just another part of life during these hotter months. These nasty gastrointestinal ailments were politely called the summer complaint. Fortunately, today, virtually every home in the U.S. has a refrigerator, keeping our food fresh and safe to eat.
For most of human history, if you lived close to your food, you did not need refrigeration. The only people who really struggled to feed themselves were armies, and they had to sort of live off the land as they moved through it, which put a huge strain on the land, of course. And actually, the next big innovation in food preservation, canning, was a military invention. Napoleon, who had put together the largest army the world had ever seen at that point, was really struggling to feed them. And so launched this prize won by a French guy who came up with canning. So it really actually wasn't a huge problem. Yes, okay, come March, before there were new season vegetables, you might be very bored of potatoes and turnips and cabbage. You would be longing for something fresh and green.
That's Nicola Twilley, author of Frostbite: How Refrigeration Changed Our Food, Our Planet, and Ourselves. She's also co-host of Gastropod, the podcast that looks at food through the lens of science and history. She says preserving fresh food became a big problem in the 1800s during the Industrial Revolution, when people began migrating away from farms and reliable sources of fresh proteins.
London became the biggest city the world had ever seen. No one had ever lived in a city of more than 1 million people before, and suddenly London was 3 million people and more, and growing by 1 million a decade at points. And the crisis was, how do you get these people fresh food? And they weren't even really trying to get them fruits and veg. Fruits and veg were seen as very optional extras. But at the time, and this was particularly pressing because the new discipline of chemistry, scientists had just figured out what the components of food were, the macronutrients, so protein, carbohydrate, fat. And they had done some mistaken experiments, and they had concluded that protein was the only necessary nutrient. Protein was everything.
This belief that meat was essential led to a flood of patents by people trying to find creative ways to preserve animal products in the days before refrigeration.
And this is actually where you get the prototype for today's bouillon cube. People were compressing meat, powdering meat, shredding meat, fumigating meat, shellacking meat. They were trying absolutely everything they could to preserve meat. The one thing that people didn't really think would work was cold. And it wasn't because they were stupid or that they hadn't noticed that cold had a preservative effect. Everyone had noticed that. Neolithic man was digging ice pits for his mammoth meat, but no one saw a way to make it work at the kind of scale you'd need to feed a city.
Even after commercial refrigeration was invented and marketed to the public in the 1920s, consumers had a tough time trusting the technology. That is, until a researcher named Polly Pennington proved that food stored in refrigerators was safe to eat.
It makes total sense that people thought refrigeration was bad for them because it's really weird when you think about it. Before, if something looked fresh, you knew exactly how old it was, right? If a chicken looked fresh, it could not have been slaughtered more than a couple of days earlier. Now you have this technology that allows a chicken to look fresh even if it was slaughtered 6 months earlier. Well, that is freaky. People at first were like, what is this zombie undead food? People thought it was immoral, interfering in life's natural progress toward decay. They thought they were being swindled. People were passing things off as fresh when they were actually refrigerated. And it was Polly Pennington who did the work to make refrigeration safe. She put in place the regulations, she did the research, and then put in place the regulations that made Americans trust that refrigerated food was not going to kill them.
In fact, her work was so compelling that the market took a complete 180. Today, many consumers think that even shelf-stable products like rice and soy milk need to be refrigerated to stay fresh. Manufacturers of these products even buy storage space in the refrigerated sections of grocery stores, despite it being unnecessary. But Twilley says that while refrigeration has improved our lives, It's also a major source of carbon emissions driving global warming.
Your home fridge is just the tip of the iceberg, right? The cold chain is this interconnected network of spaces that keeps perishable food cold from the farm to the supermarket. And that includes trucks, and that includes shipping containers, and that includes warehouses like the one I worked in, and that includes supermarket distribution centers, and it includes rail cars and ships and pre-cooling stations on the farm to get what they call the field heat out of crops, and chilled slaughterhouses. And there is a lot of cold space behind what you see. It's really, you think, oh, I have a fridge. I rely on my fridge and my fridge is big. That is a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of the space that is dedicated, that is kept cold to get your food to you.
The rest of the world doesn't have a massive US-style cold chain, not even in Western Europe. In Rwanda, less than 1% of citizens own a refrigerator. But if Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa plan to build cold chain systems, Twilly says the effects could be disastrous for the environment.
You need power to run those refrigerators, and the chemicals that we use to do that work of pulling the heat out, those are, many of them, super greenhouse gases as well. Refrigerant management, managing those chemicals, was listed by Project Drawdown as the #1 thing we could do to get a handle on climate change.
So, what's the answer? We can't get rid of refrigeration. Twilly says one alternative for keeping fruits and vegetables fresh longer is an odorless, tasteless, colorless spray coating made of food lipids. The product is called Apeel. That's APEEL. The plant-based spray takes an innovative approach to extending shelf life.
The thing you have to understand about a cucumber is when you harvest it, it's still alive and it is still breathing. And like us, it has a certain number of breaths it can take before it's going to die. And so the whole trick is you want to slow down how fast it's breathing. And you do that with cold. Cold slows down metabolism. That's how it works. But you can also do it by changing the atmosphere it's breathing. So you can reduce the oxygen levels. You can allow more carbon dioxide transport out. You can just tweak what it's breathing to slow it down. And that's what this coating does.
Twilly says a product like Apeel would allow farmers in Rwanda, for example, to get produce to market before it rots. Twilly says Apeel is harmless and shouldn't be confused with a cleaning product by the same name. Maybe fear of a coating that prolongs freshness is similar to the public's distrust of refrigeration when it first came to market. Whatever the case, Twilly hopes people will rethink how they stock their refrigerators.
Your fridge is not a bank vault. The food is still aging while it's in there. If you buy a bag of spinach and you eat it a week later, it will have, in some cases, only like a quarter of the nutrients, the vitamins, the minerals that it had when you bought it. So don't use it like a bank vault, and don't do that sort of aspirational, I need to have it stocked so that we can eat it. Buy what you're going to eat when you're going to eat it. And people, if you live far from the store and it's just not convenient to get there, use your freezer instead, because that is preserving, that's doing a much better job of preserving the vitamins and nutrients than your fridge. We've been sort of raised to think fresh produce is better than frozen, but really, if it's not actually fresh, then that's not the case.
You can learn more about this topic in Nicola Twilly's book, Frostbite: How Refrigeration Changed Our Food, Our Planet, and Ourselves. You can find out more about her podcast, Gastropod, by visiting our website at viewpointsradio.org, where you'll also learn more about all of our past guests. This segment was written and produced by Polly Hansen. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. Our studio manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson.